read the whole darn thing.
I'm on point and on message.
Yeah. Thanks, Ari. It is so my pleasure to be here, and it's always a little weird to do excerpts, so I've written a couple transitions that I hope will make sense. It's an hour and 15-minute show. You're not going to hear it all, but about 10 minutes of it, so we'll take little pieces of it, but I think you'll get an idea of the flow. How is this? Oh, you know what? We're not going to show these now. These come at the end. That is me in my tryouts for Annie.
Typecast.
Can we hit the B and just black this out for now? It's not doing that? There we go. Okay. Hi. So here we go. Little excerpt from Dividing Lines. The Education of a Chicago White Girl in 10 Rounds. The first black child I ever met wore a Davy Crockett cap. So did I. We met at the downtown State Street bus stop. Our mothers had gotten us there just in time for the first release from Marshall Fields of Davy Crockett raccoon skin caps. It was 1955. I was 5 years old. I assumed the boy was the same age. We showed each other our caps. We showed each other our Jim Bowie rubber knives. We chased each other around that bus stop bench. We even sang Davy's song. Killed him a bar when he was only 3. If you know the song, sing along. Davy Crockett, king on the wild frontier. His bus came first. His bus came first. And before either mother could see what was happening, I followed him on. He reached back for me. I reached up the steps for him. And just as we touched, we flew away from each other. I felt my mother's fingers dig deep into my arm as she yanked me into her body and she whispered, "We don't go his way." I searched for my friend through the reflection of the glass. I said, well, maybe we'll be in the same kindergarten class. "No, you won't." She chopped the words into my ears. "He lives," she started to say, and then she turned over both shoulders. "He lives in a different neighborhood." Still with her voice, in a whisper I didn't understand. But the lesson was transmitted all the same. Never spoken, but transmitted from muscle to bone. We lived in different places, and our neighborhood was better. Now, as I grew older, throughout grammar school, the racial messages grew less and less subtle, like during the Friday night fights. Oh, my family, we loved our sports. We loved being on the winning team, and no sport was watched as consistently, as devotedly, as religiously as the Friday night fights. Now, the Friday night fights in my family were highly interactive. And I don't mean people just sat on the couch, little sideline coaching, talking to the TV. No, no, no. My parents and grandparents who lived with us, they were in the ring with the boxers. They were up on their feet. They were swinging. They were punching. They were grunting. They were yelling at the ref. "Oh, he hit below the belt. That ref needs glasses. We were robbed." I loved those Friday night fights. And then my parents and grandparents began making bets on who they thought would win. They bet according to color. As I said, they weren't so subtle by this point. It went like this: vote for the white guy if it was white against black. Vote for the Mexican or Cuban boxer if it was brown against black. And if it was 2 black boxers, vote for the light-skinned man. The reason for most of the hatred in my neighborhood, as best I could figure out, was the fight over our houses, the fight over where we would live. I lived by 87th and Kedzie, the far southwest corner of the city. And all the time I was growing up, I was surrounded by a kind of war mentality, constant ambush talk about them. Night after night, I'd sit on the front porches of 84th Street, and I would hear my neighbors saying, "Hey, I heard they took 63rd Street. Do you think Halsted Avenue will hold? Hey, Jamie said he saw one of them on Morgan Avenue. I swear to God, on Morgan." All the time I was growing up, Neighbors who had lived east of us in changing neighborhoods, flooded into our parish, St. Thomas More, like refugees from war. Night after night, I would hear these neighbors, these new arrivals, weep for their old parishes. And sometimes we'd drive downtown with the ladies to shop at Marshall Fields. And as we crossed into the black neighborhood, they'd say, "Okay, kids, put your buttons down." Put your buttons down was code for lock your car door. We're driving into a black neighborhood. And one of the ladies would say, "Oh, I want to see the old house. Come on, turn over here. Here it is." And we turn a corner, and there would be a boarded up building or no building at all. And during those rituals, the ladies would sit in the car and they'd cry. And they'd tell us how it used to be, the building, the neighborhood, their mothers, their dad. They'd tell us how everybody pledged that they wouldn't move out, promised to stay, but how people were wakened in the middle of the night, wakened by a stranger's voice, wakened in fright. "You better get out. Get out now while you still can. Get out now while your kids are still safe, or you can still get a good price for the house." Terrified, people began to move out under cover of night. The ladies told us how they'd be talking with a neighbor over the backyard fence, like they did every night, about the roses they were trying to grow or the pot roast they had just cooked for dinner. And then how they'd wake the next morning to find that a colored family had moved in and that their neighbors of 40 years were gone. They didn't know where. Night after night, I would hear the stories. I was indoctrinated into the story that our neighborhood would hold. It wouldn't happen to us. These houses, they were the pride and joy of our parents. They were the prize of a lifetime. I can't tell you how people fussed over those little bungalow houses, come back from 8, 12-hour shift at the factory and scrub down their sidewalks. I grew up with the Southwest Chicago side American Gothic version. Men and women standing in front of their houses with grass clippers in hand, sternly staring straight ahead, just daring a blade of grass to grow. And then they would dig deep ditch borders around their lawn so that not one blade would escape and touch the sidewalk. But that posted stamp size lawn, that small bungalow house, it said you were somebody. It said you took care of your family, your whole family. Because not only do we have our mothers with us back then, living at home, working at home, watching out for his kids, we had aunts and uncles and grandmas and grandpas all living in the same house, keeping an eye out for his kids. The good news is I had hundreds of parents. The bad news is I had hundreds of parents. But we all belonged on 84th Street. We all belonged in St. Thomas More. But some people did not belong. They would try to take over our houses. They would try to take over our neighborhood, but our neighborhood would hold. But inside we knew that we were only shadow boxing. Because deep inside we knew that always, there were these legions of black people ready to march into our neighborhood, taking us over one block at a time. By the time it was 1964, I was 14 years old, a freshman in high school. I had learned that when it came to the fight over our houses, it was us against them. Now, by the time I got to sophomore year high school, is that on, Arif? I wonder if it's causing the feedback.
Oh, yeah.
We'll see.
No, it's off.
Okay, I don't know. We'll see. If we have to, I'll take it off. But a sophomore year high school, there was a nun at my high school, a radical nun, who brought me to an all-city interracial youth group, Young Christian Students, YCS. It was a youth civil rights group, and it changed my life. In YCS, for the first time, I left my neighborhood and met black and brown kids my age. For the first time, I heard stories from the other side of the dividing line. But even with my newfound friendships and my growing awareness of the existing discrimination in our country, when it came to my home, I still felt this tug of us against them. I needed to discover that racism was more than personal and interpersonal. I needed to learn why we lived where we lived and why others lived where they did, and how we'd become opponents over the same pieces of land. I needed to understand who benefited from our hate and misinformation, and how we'd all been used. 1969, College Live-In Project, CLIP. I took in the summer between my freshman and sophomore year of college a course where you actually lived in a neighborhood, worked there, and studied in your apartments. And as part of the internship, I had to talk to the people in the neighborhood. And I met a man named Nate. Now, Nate was this elderly African-American man who was like a living, breathing history book. He knew so much. And he was the nicest guy. He had this Mr. Rogers sort of vibe. He even wore a cardigan sweater. And I went to interview him many times. And he's the one that taught me that Chicago had not always been segregated. This blew my mind. He told me at the early 1900s there really wasn't what you would call an all-white or all-black part of the city. But during that time there had been some racial tensions because unions, politicians, other people understood the benefit of that game, divide and conquer, such as bringing in black strikebreakers to break up the stockyard. It was my grandpa when he lost his job and black people took his job. And those tensions began to spill over into the 1919 race riots. Now, instead of going ahead and saying, okay, city leaders, we'll look at those people who are causing tension and divide and conquer. No, instead what they did is decided we'll have black and white areas of town and terrorize black people to get out of the areas they wanted to make white, for instance. I had never known any of this. So here's what Nate told me. He said that because the black districts were not large enough for all the people in it, the landlords could make a mint dividing and subdividing up those apartments, charging 3 and 4 times the rent they would usually get from one white family. They put a little light bulb in the attic. Oh, that's an apartment. String a couple electric lines down in the basement. That's an apartment, right? So Nate said, we tried to escape the overcrowding, the landlord's neglect. We moved across the color line, thought I was doing something good for my family. But I learned pretty soon that those realtors were just using us to turn that neighborhood. We stuck it out, though, Nate told me, even when whites threw burning rags into our house. But the worst was when the realtors started to buy up those houses. They bought in prostitutes, drugs, arson, anything they could to try to chase the white people out, because that was the name of the game. Buy low from the whites, sell high to the blacks. Still, we stuck it out. We complained to the politicians. We said, nice middle-class neighborhoods turning lower class, but the politicians undertake, the police undertake, they just look the other way. And all the time, Nate says, white people come back sightseeing, sitting in front of our houses and crying. And I always wanted to come out and say, well, why did you leave then? And what the heck kind of control do you think I had over any of this? I would have been a good neighbor to you, but now I've got to move too. I had never thought about how our sightseeing visits to those old houses affected the people who lived in those houses. I never knew that segregation had been forced. I never knew that white and black neighborhoods had been created. So the show goes on for the second wave of segregation with the projects and such. And I never really understood so many things because the system, of course, works best in silence, in our ignorance of what each other is going through. From then on, after meeting Nate, after that summer program, I looked into the history of segregation in Chicago, into more stories from the other side of the dividing line. And in my piece, I discussed so many more political and economic decisions that were made to give our city and suburbs the look they have today, the conflicts they have today. And I learned that our city's history wasn't so much a boxing match of black against white, but a chess game where we were all being moved about like pawns as others decide what squares would be white or black or brown. How did I know to change the metaphor from the boxing ring to a chess game? I followed the money trail to see who was benefiting from letting this neighborhood build up or this neighborhood decline, having these people move and these people stay. And toward the end of the show, I say this. And the same structural racism exists today. But we do not have to be pawns in this game. We can step outside the ring We can create a vision powerful enough to get beyond that split of us versus them. And I wonder if you would help me do that. Envision a future never ever envisioned for that little boy and me back in 1955 with our Davy Crockett caps. Imagine our children, great-grandchildren, even in the turn of the next century, sitting in schools learning about Chicago and the suburbs when they used to be segregated. Trying to imagine that people ever fought for or about housing. That there was ever a time that every kid wouldn't have friends of every race and religion and income group. Sometimes it's like I want to write a love letter to our city. And I want to say to anybody who can admit that the separation hurts us and splits us and robs us of our true loving natures. I want to say that we say we will not be divided. We will not be played against each other. That we will speak the truth. That we are one people. We are one metropolitan area. We are one family. Together, we will speak the truth. The fight is over.